"I need you to leave this meeting, Amanda." My uncle's voice cut through the boardroom like a knife. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, some with pity, others carefully avoiding my gaze. He didn't even have the decency to lower his voice as he continued, "These discussions are for essential personnel only." Essential personnel. 3 years as the company's top-performing director of operations, and suddenly I wasn't essential. I glanced down at the financial reports clutched in my hands, the ones showing exactly how much trouble Hartwell Industries was really in. The ones I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. perfecting. The ones that contained the restructuring plan that could actually save the family business. "But Uncle Richard, I've prepared the quarterly." "That won't be necessary," he interrupted, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We have enough people at the table. Perhaps you could get us some coffee while you wait?" Get them coffee. Like I was an intern instead of the person who doubled their manufacturing efficiency in the last year. Like I hadn't graduated top of my class from Wharton while my cousin, Uncle Richard's son, had barely scraped through community college before being handed a vice president title. I felt the blood rush to my face as I gathered my materials with steady hands. Pride kept my back straight as I walked toward the door, feeling their stares burning into me. Nobody spoke up, not even my father's oldest friend Martin, who knew exactly how hard I'd worked. Not even my cousin Kate, who had texted me just last night about how excited she was to hear my presentation. As the heavy door closed behind me, I allowed myself one deep, shuddering breath. Then I straightened my blazer, squared my shoulders, and walked calmly to my office. They had no idea who they'd just dismissed. They had no idea that I was the one keeping Hartwell Industries afloat. They had no idea that I, Amanda Hartwell, was Monarch Investments, the silent partner who had injected $8 million into the company over the past year. And now, they were about to learn what happens when you bite the hand that's been feeding you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It never occurred to me that I'd end up secretly financing my own family's business. Growing up, Hartwell Industries was always presented to me as an unstoppable force. My grandfather had built it from nothing, transforming a small metal fabrication shop in Cleveland into a regional manufacturing powerhouse. Hartwell's don't quit and Hartwell's don't fail was practically our family motto, repeated at every holiday dinner and company picnic. I believed it too, working summers on the factory floor during high school, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. Unlike my cousins who complained about the heat and the noise, I loved watching raw materials transform into precision parts. There was something almost magical about the process, chaotic inputs becoming ordered outputs through human ingenuity and perseverance. My grandfather noticed my interest, taking me under his wing in a way he never did with my cousins. "You've got the Hartwell eye," he'd tell me. "You see the whole system, not just the individual parts." When he passed away 5 years ago, I was halfway through my MBA, determined to bring modern business practices to Hartwell Industries. The company had good bones, but its systems were outdated, its technology lagging behind competitors. I had plans, detailed ones, for how to streamline operations while preserving the craftsmanship that had built our reputation. But when the will was read, control passed to my father and my Uncle Richard as equal partners. My father, the quieter, more thoughtful brother, focused on product development and manufacturing quality. Uncle Richard took over sales, marketing, and finance, elevating his title to CEO within months. At first, everything seemed fine. I finished my degree and joined the company as director of operations, reporting to my father. My recommendations were implemented, efficiency improved, and we landed several major contracts. Uncle Richard took credit for most of it during client meetings, but I didn't mind. Results mattered more than recognition. Then my father had a stroke. It wasn't fatal, thankfully, but it left him unable to work. His shares in the company remained his, but his voting proxy went to my uncle during his recovery. Suddenly, the delicate balance of power that had kept Hartwell Industries on track tilted dramatically. Within weeks, Uncle Richard had promoted his son Jeremy to Vice President of Business Development, a newly created position, despite his complete lack of qualifications. My budget requests were denied or delayed. My emails went unanswered. Decisions were made without my input. And then the company started hemorrhaging money. It happened slowly at first. A few reckless investments, an unnecessary office renovation, a fleet of luxury company cars. By the time I gained access to the complete financial picture, Hartwell Industries was 6 months from bankruptcy. My father was still recovering. His speech improved, but his cognitive processing still impaired. I couldn't burden him with this knowledge. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I created Monarch Investments using the inheritance my grandfather had left me directly, along with his faith in my Hartwell eye, and approached Uncle Richard as an anonymous angel investor. The irony was almost painful. Uncle Richard boasted to everyone about how his business acumen had attracted this mysterious savior. Meanwhile, I was in the background, running analyses to determine exactly where the financial bleeding was worst and how it could be stopped. For a year, this arrangement worked. My money kept the company solvent while I tried to influence decisions from within. But Uncle Richard grew increasingly resistant to my operational suggestions, increasingly dismissive of my concerns, which brought me to today's board meeting, the one I'd been preparing for weeks to unveil my comprehensive restructuring plan, the one I'd just been kicked out of like an annoying intern. I sat at my desk, staring at the family photo from happier times that I kept next to my computer. My grandfather stood in the center, arms around my father and Uncle Richard, the factory stretching behind them. He'd built something real, something that employed 300 people, something that had survived economic downturns and technological disruptions. I wasn't about to let Uncle Richard's ego destroy it. My phone buzzed, with a text from Kate. That was awful. What is my dad thinking? I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder labeled Contingency Plan. I'd created it 3 months ago when I first noticed Uncle Richard excluding me from critical meetings. At the time, it had seemed paranoid. Now, it seemed prescient. The plan was simple but precise. As Monarch Investments, I had structured my financial support as convertible notes with specific performance requirements. Requirements that, according to the quarterly numbers I'd just reviewed, Hartwell Industries had failed to meet for 2 consecutive quarters. One more quarter of underperformance, and I could convert those notes to controlling equity. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the number for my college roommate, now a successful corporate attorney specializing in family business disputes. Sophia Bennett's office, her assistant answered. This is Amanda Hartwell for Sophia. It's important. A moment later, Sophia's warm voice came on the line. Amanda, it's been ages. How are things at Hartwell Industries? That's actually why I'm calling. Do you have time for lunch today? There's something I need your help with. 2 hours later, we were sitting at a quiet corner table in Vincenzo's, a small Italian place known for its discretion. I'd already explained the situation, showing Sophia the documentation for Monarch Investments and the terms of the convertible notes. Let me get this straight, Sophia said, twirling pasta around her fork. You've been secretly financing your family's company for a year, and they have no idea? My uncle has no idea, I corrected. My cousin Kate might suspect something. She's smart and she pays attention. But she's never asked directly, and I've never told her. And now you want to know if you can take control. I nodded. The company's on track to miss its targets again this quarter. That would trigger the conversion clause. But I need to know if there are any legal vulnerabilities I'm not seeing. Uncle Richard won't go down without a fight. Sophia put down her fork and looked at me directly. The agreements themselves are solid. The real question is whether you're prepared for the fallout. Family businesses are complicated enough without secret identities and hostile takeovers. It's not hostile. If I'm saving the company from insolvency, I pointed out, it will feel hostile to your uncle, Sophia replied, and possibly to others in the family. Are you prepared to deal with that? I stared into my glass of water, watching the ice cubes slowly melt. Was I prepared? The confrontation would be ugly. Relationships might be permanently damaged. Family dinners would certainly be awkward for the foreseeable future. But the alternative was watching my grandfather's legacy crumble because of pride and mismanagement. I'm prepared, I said finally, meeting Sophia's gaze. What do I need to do next? Back at the office, I maintained my normal routine. I attended meetings I was still invited to. I completed my regular work with the same diligence I always had. I even smiled politely when Jeremy passed me in the hallway. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bragging loudly on his phone about some deal he was supposedly closing. But beneath this calm exterior, I was laying groundwork. I spoke privately with key managers, asking subtle questions about their concerns and frustrations. I documented operational decisions that had been made against my recommendations. I compiled evidence of financial mismanagement that would be impossible to dispute. Most importantly, I met with Frank Coleman, our head of engineering, and my father's oldest friend at the company. Frank had been with Hartwell Industries for 30 years and was universally respected throughout the organization. I need to know if I'm overreacting, I told him, after swearing him to secrecy and explaining the situation. We were sitting in his modest home, well away from workplace ears. Am I seeing problems that aren't really there because I'm angry about being sidelined? Frank removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was considering a difficult problem. You're not overreacting, he said finally. The company's in trouble and it's getting worse. Richard's making promises to clients we can't keep with our current capacity. He's cutting corners on materials to pad the bottom line. Morale is the lowest I've ever seen it. Why haven't you said anything? He gave me a weary smile. To whom? Richard doesn't listen to engineering concerns. Your father's still recovering. And you. He paused. I thought you knew and were choosing not to fight battles you couldn't win. I shook my head, digesting this new information. The materials issue is serious, Frank. That affects our quality, our reputation. I know. I've documented everything. He stood and walked to his home office, returning with a thick folder. I was planning to take this to your father when he was stronger, but maybe it's better in your hands. I took the folder, feeling its weight. Why are you still here, Frank? You could work anywhere with your experience. He looked at the family photos on his mantle, children and grandchildren smiling in various settings. My kids grew up with this company paying for their education. My grandson's medical treatments were covered by our insurance when a lot of other plans would have denied them. Your grandfather built more than a business, Amanda. He built a community. His eyes, when they met mine, were fierce with conviction. That's worth fighting for. I left Frank's house with renewed determination and a clearer understanding of exactly what was at stake. This wasn't just about family pride or my wounded ego. It was about 300 employees and their families. It was about customers who depended on our parts. It was about a 70-year legacy of quality and integrity. The next morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual, wanting time to center myself before facing another day of pretending nothing was wrong. To my surprise, Uncle Richard's assistant Brenda was waiting by my office door, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Hartwell would like to see you in his office, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Now? I asked, checking my watch. It was 7:15 a.m. He was very specific, she replied, already turning to leave. I followed her to the executive suite, curiosity mixing with caution. Uncle Richard rarely arrived before 9 LDM, and he almost never requested morning meetings. Something had changed. He was standing at his window when I entered, looking out at the factory floor below. Unlike my modest office with its practical furniture and working documents, his space was designed to impress. Expensive art, custom furniture, and a desk large enough to land a small aircraft. "Amanda," he said without turning. "Thank you for coming so promptly. You wanted to see me?" Now he turned, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "I received an interesting email last night from Monarch Investments. They're concerned about our quarterly numbers." I kept my face neutral. I hadn't sent any such email. "That's not surprising," I said carefully. "The numbers aren't good." "No, they're not," he agreed, surprising me with his candor. "Which is why Monarch is sending a representative to our executive committee meeting on Thursday. They want a full accounting of our financial situation and our plan moving forward." My mind raced. I hadn't planned this move. Someone else was using Monarch's name. "I see," I said, buying time. "And how can I help with that?" Uncle Richard sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "I need your quarterly operations report after all, the one you were going to present yesterday." "The one that wasn't necessary from non-essential personnel?" I couldn't help the edge in my voice. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Yesterday was. I was under a lot of pressure. The board has questions I can't easily answer." "About the new product line?" I asked innocently, knowing full well that Jeremy's pet project was months behind schedule and millions over budget. "Among other things." He sat down heavily in his leather chair. "The point is, we need to present a united front to Monarch on Thursday. They're our lifeline, and if they pull their funding." He left the sentence unfinished, but its implications hung in the air. I allowed myself one moment of satisfaction before nodding professionally. "I'll update my presentation with the latest numbers. Anything else you need from me?" "Just your discretion. The meeting details are confidential. Only the executive committee and necessary presenters." He emphasized the word necessary with just enough inflection to make his point. Yesterday, I'd been superfluous. Today, I was indispensable. "Of course," I agreed smoothly. "Will that be all?" He nodded dismissively, already reaching for his phone. Crisis apparently managed in his mind. I walked back to my office, mind whirling. Someone was impersonating Monarch Investments. The question was who and why. My phone buzzed as I reached my desk. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Coffee at Westfield Plaza in 30 minutes? Regarding our mutual investment." I stared at the message, then typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who knows your Monarch. Someone who wants to help." 28 minutes later, I was sitting at an outdoor table at the Westfield Plaza coffee shop, a location deliberately chosen for its distance from Hartwell Industries. I'd arrived early to secure a private table and to observe anyone approaching. "Ms. Hartwell?" I looked up to see a woman about my age, professionally dressed with an iPad tucked under her arm. Her confident posture and direct gaze marked her as someone accustomed to taking control of situations. "I'm Vanessa Liu," she continued, extending her hand. "Senior analyst at Redwood Capital." I shook her hand automatically, my mind racing. Redwood Capital was one of the largest private equity firms in the Midwest. "You sent the email to my uncle," I said, the pieces falling into place, posing as Monarch Investments. She smiled, taking the seat across from me. "May I?" Without waiting for an answer, she placed her iPad on the table. "And yes, I sent the email. I needed to create an opportunity for transparency that didn't expose your position." "How did you figure it out?" "That you're Monarch?" She shrugged lightly. "It took some detective work. Money always leaves a trail, even when the path is deliberately obscured. But that's not important. What's important is what happens next. I studied her, trying to understand her angle. And what does Redwood Capital want to happen next? We want to acquire Hartwell Industries. She stated it matter-of-factly, as though discussing the weather. The company has significant untapped potential, valuable patents, and a skilled workforce. What it lacks is proper management and adequate capitalization. It's not for sale, I said automatically. Everything's for sale at the right price, she countered. And right now, Hartwell's price is declining daily under your uncle's leadership. I couldn't argue with that assessment, but something about her confidence bothered me. Why approach me instead of my uncle directly? Because you're the one with the leverage. She tapped her iPad, bringing up a document. As Monarch Investments, you hold convertible notes that could give you controlling interest in the company. Your conversion terms activate after 3 consecutive quarters of missed targets. She looked up, meeting my eyes. This will be the 3rd quarter. She was well-informed, too well-informed. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, keeping my voice level. A partnership. She slid the iPad toward me. Redwood will provide the capital necessary to stabilize and grow Hartwell Industries. You maintain operational control as CEO. Your uncle and cousin receive generous compensation packages to exit gracefully. Everyone wins. I glanced at the proposal on the screen, noting the numbers, which were admittedly impressive. And if I'm not interested? Vanessa reclaimed her iPad, her expression still pleasant, but her eyes hardening slightly. Then we approach your uncle directly with an offer he'll likely accept given the company's financial position. You'll maintain your ownership stake, of course, but with significantly diminished influence. It was a threat wrapped in politeness, but it also revealed something important. Redwood wasn't certain of my uncle's awareness of the company's true financial position. They needed an insider, someone who could navigate the family dynamics. They needed me. I'll need time to consider this, I said, standing up. And I'll need to see the complete proposal, not just the highlights. Of course, she handed me a business card. I'll email you the full documentation. We'd like an answer before Thursday's meeting. I took the card, nodding once before walking away. My mind was already analyzing this new development, calculating how it changed my options. Back in my car, I sat for a moment before starting. The engine. Redwood's interest was both a complication and an opportunity. Their resources could indeed help Hartwell Industries grow beyond its current limitations. But private equity firms weren't known for their patient, employee-focused approach to business. Frank's words echoed in my mind. Your grandfather built more than a business. He built a community. Would that community survive under Redwood's ownership? Would the families who had worked for Hartwell for generations still have jobs in 5 years? In 2? I started the car, decision made. I wouldn't be selling to Redwood. But I could use their interest and their threat to accelerate my own plans. By the time I returned to the office, I had outlined my strategy. First, I needed to understand exactly who knew what about Monarch Investments. If Vanessa Liu had figured out my identity, others might have as well. I spent the afternoon updating my presentation as promised, but also discreetly reviewing all communications related to Monarch, checking security protocols, and mapping out the potential information leaks. At 6:30 p.m., most of the office had cleared out. I was still at my desk, finalizing details, when Kate appeared in my doorway. "Working late again?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Unlike her brother Jeremy, Kate had actually earned her position as marketing director through talent and hard work. "Just wrapping up," I replied, saving my files. "What about you?" "Avoiding going home," she admitted with a wry smile. "Mom's on another health kick. Dinner will be kale and disappointment." I laughed despite myself. Aunt Patricia's periodic wellness obsessions were legendary family jokes. Kate stepped into my office, closing the door behind her. "Listen, about yesterday's meeting." "It's fine," I interrupted, not wanting her sympathy. "It's not fine," she insisted, dropping into the chair across from my desk. "It was humiliating and stupid. Dad's making bad decisions lately, and everyone's too afraid to call him on it." I studied my cousin, seeing the genuine concern in her expression. "Everyone, including you?" She had the grace to look embarrassed. I should have said something. I just froze. "It's complicated," I acknowledged. "He's your father. And the company's CEO," she added. "But that doesn't make him right." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Amanda, something weird is going on. Dad's been locked in his office all afternoon making calls. Brenda mentioned something about Monarch Investments sending a representative on Thursday." I kept my expression neutral. "I heard about that." "What do you know about Monarch?" she pressed. "Dad acts like they're saviors, but he's weirdly secretive about the actual terms of their investment." This was my opportunity to gauge how much Kate knew or suspected. "I know they've provided significant capital over the past year. Beyond that, the details haven't been shared with me." Kate frowned, clearly unsatisfied with my answer. "Don't you think it's strange? This mysterious investor appears right when we need them most, asks for minimal oversight, and now suddenly wants a full accounting." She paused, studying my face, almost like someone on the inside was pulling strings. My heart rate increased, but I kept my expression calm. "That's quite a theory." "Is it?" She tilted her head, her eyes never leaving mine. "Because I've been looking at the timing of the investments, and they align perfectly with particular operational crises. Crises that you identified weeks before they became evident to everyone else." I stayed silent, neither confirming nor denying. After a moment, Kate smiled slightly. "It's okay. Your secret's safe with me." She stood up, adjusting her purse strap. "Whatever you're planning, I want you to know I'm on your side. Dad's running this company into the ground, and someone needs to stop him before it's too late." As she reached the door, she turned back. "Just try to remember he's not a bad person. He's just scared and overcompensating. Grandpa's shadow is a difficult place to live." After she left, I sat in the dim light of my office, thinking about her words. Uncle Richard wasn't a villain in a movie, twirling his mustache and plotting destruction. He was a man trying to live up to a legendary father, making poor decisions from a place of insecurity rather than malice. It didn't excuse his actions or mitigate the damage he was causing. But it did remind me that this situation was about saving the company, not punishing my uncle. The next morning, I received the promised email from Vanessa Liu, containing Redwood Capital's full acquisition proposal. The numbers were even more impressive than the preview she'd shown me, including retention bonuses for key employees and a significant personal compensation package for me if I facilitated the deal. It was tempting. I could walk away wealthy, freed from family business drama, able to start fresh elsewhere. But as I scrolled through the document, the red flags became apparent. Buried in the legal language were clauses about operational restructuring and efficiency optimization. Corporate euphemisms for layoffs and outsourcing. The very community my grandfather had built would be dismantled within 18 months. I forwarded the proposal to Sophia, asking for her legal assessment, then turned my attention to preparing for Thursday's meeting. If I was going to reveal myself as Monarch Investments, I needed everything to be perfect. Thursday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. I'd slept poorly, my mind racing through scenarios and contingency plans until the early hours. By the time I reached Hartwell Industries, the parking lot was already filled with luxury vehicles I didn't recognize. Redwood Capital's delegation had arrived in force. I made my way to the executive conference room, the same room I'd been unceremoniously ejected from days earlier. Through the glass walls, I could see Uncle Richard gesturing animatedly to a group of suits, Vanessa Liu among them, her expression professionally neutral as she nodded at whatever pitch he was delivering. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my blazer and entered the room. "Ah, Amanda!" Uncle Richard's voice was too loud, his smile too wide, the telltale signs of his nervousness. Perfect timing. I was just explaining our operational efficiencies to the Redwood team. Vanessa's eyes met mine, a subtle question in them. I gave nothing away, nodding professionally to the assembled group. "Ms. Hartwell," Vanessa said, extending her hand. "A pleasure to meet you officially. Your reputation precedes you." "Does it?" I replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Your operational innovations have been quite impressive," she continued smoothly. "Our analysis suggests Hartwell Industries' manufacturing efficiency has improved 32% since you joined the executive team." Uncle Richard's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the first time someone had attributed company improvements to me rather than him, and it never failed to irritate him. "Amanda has certainly contributed," he said, quickly redirecting. "But perhaps we should begin. The formal presentation? We have quite a full agenda." The next hour was a carefully choreographed dance. Uncle Richard presented an optimistic overview of Hartwell Industries' market position and future prospects, glossing over the financial issues with practiced vagueness. Jeremy followed with a rambling explanation of his new product development initiative, complete with flashy slides but devoid of substantive metrics. Then it was my turn. "Thank you, Jeremy," I said, connecting my laptop to the projector. "I'd like to address our operational realities and the concrete steps we're taking to address current challenges." Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair as my first slide appeared, a stark, honest assessment of our financial position. "As you can see," I continued, "Hartwell Industries has experienced significant cash flow issues over the past 18 months, primarily due to three factors: overexpansion into unproven markets, increased material costs due to supplier changes, and substantial overhead increases." The Redwood team leaned forward, clearly appreciating this departure from the glossy spin they'd heard so far. Vanessa caught my eye and gave a small nod of approval. "However," I continued, advancing to the next slide, "our core business remains strong. Our primary manufacturing divisions are operating at 92% efficiency with minimal defect rates. Customer satisfaction scores for our established product lines remain above industry average. The foundation is solid." For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through my analysis, acknowledging our weaknesses but emphasizing our strengths, presenting clear data rather than empty promises. I concluded with my restructuring proposal, a detailed plan to return to profitability within 3 quarters. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Uncle Richard looked stunned, clearly not expecting such a comprehensive presentation. Jeremy was scowling at his notebook. The Redwood team was exchanging glances, obviously reassessing their assumptions. "Thank you, Amanda," Vanessa said finally. "That was extraordinarily helpful." She turned to Uncle Richard. "Mr. Hartwell, based on Ms. Hartwell's analysis, it appears your company has been missing its quarterly targets for some time now. Is this accurate?" Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "Well, in certain divisions, yes, but for 2 consecutive quarters," I interrupted quietly, "with projections indicating we'll miss the current quarter as well." The room went still. Uncle Richard stared at me, confusion turning to suspicion. "That's correct," said a new voice from the doorway. We all turned to see Kate standing there, holding a folder. "I have the preliminary numbers for this quarter. We're tracking 27% below target." She walked in confidently, placing copies of her report in front of each Redwood representative. "The marketing team has compiled customer feedback and market analysis that supports Amanda's assessment. Our core business remains strong but recent. Strategic decisions have created significant instability. Uncle Richard's face flushed dark red. Kate, this meeting is for essential personnel, she finished for him. Yes, I recall that distinction from earlier this week. As marketing director, I believed these insights were essential to the discussion. I could have hugged her for that perfectly timed intervention. Instead, I kept my expression neutral as she took a seat beside me. Vanessa Liu studied us both for a moment, then turned to the older man at the end of the table, clearly the senior, Redwood representative. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Mr. Hartwell, Vanessa said, turning back to my uncle. In light of this information, I think it's time we discuss the true purpose of our visit. Redwood Capital is prepared to make an offer to acquire Hartwell Industries. Uncle Richard's expression shifted from anger to surprise. Acquire? But I thought, we've been monitoring your company's performance for some time, she continued. We believe that with proper leadership and adequate capitalization, Hartwell Industries could return to profitability and expand its market share considerably. Jeremy leaned forward, suddenly interested. What kind of offer are we talking about? Vanessa slid folders across the table. The details are all here. We're prepared to move quickly, with due diligence to begin immediately and closing within 60 days. Uncle Richard opened the folder slowly, his eyes widening as he scanned the numbers. This is substantial. Yes, Vanessa agreed. Though I should note that our valuation assumes implementation of Ms. Hartwell's restructuring plan. Without those operational changes, the offer would be significantly reduced. Uncle Richard's head snapped up, his eyes darting between Vanessa and me. I could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to understand the dynamics at play. Of course, any acquisition would require approval from all major shareholders, Vanessa continued, including Monarch Investments, given their significant stake through convertible notes. And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. About Monarch Investments, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. There's something the EI board should know. Uncle Richard frowned. Amanda, we don't need to waste everyone's time with... I am Monarch Investments. The words hung in the air for a long moment. Uncle Richard stared at me, incomprehension giving way to disbelief. That's not possible, he said finally. Monarch has invested millions. You don't have that kind of money. I do, I replied calmly. My inheritance from grandfather, plus some savvy investments of my own. I created Monarch Investments specifically to support Hartwell Industries when I realized how dire the financial situation had become. Jeremy laughed dismissively. This is ridiculous. She's making this up to seem important. She's not, Kate interjected. I've suspected for months. The timing of the investments, the specific knowledge of our financial needs, it all pointed to an insider. Uncle Richard shook his head, still processing. But why the secrecy? Why not just say you wanted to invest? Would you have accepted my money if I had? I asked quietly. Or would you have seen it as a challenge to your authority? Another reminder that perhaps the wrong sibling was given control. His silence was answer enough. Whether you believe me or not, I continued, is ultimately irrelevant. The documentation proves my ownership of Monarch Investments. And as Vanessa has pointed out, Monarch's convertible notes include specific performance requirements that Hartwell Industries has failed to meet for 2 consecutive quarters, with the third failure imminent. I removed a document from my portfolio and slid it across the table. This is notification of my intent to convert Monarch's debt to equity, effective immediately. According to the terms we all agreed to, this gives me a 53% controlling interest in Hartwell Industries. Uncle Richard snatched up the document, scanning it frantically. This can't be legal. You deceived us, created a false entity. Actually, Vanessa interrupted, Ms. Hartwell's approach, while unusual, appears to be entirely legal. The convertible note agreements were properly executed by all parties. The fact that you didn't perform due diligence on Monarch's ownership is unfortunate, but doesn't invalidate the agreements. The senior Redwood executive spoke for the first time. Richard, perhaps we should take a brief recess. This is clearly a significant development that you'll want to discuss privately with your family. Uncle Richard nodded stiffly, rising from his chair. Yes, 15 minutes. He looked at me, a mixture of anger and confusion in his eyes. My office, now. As the room emptied, Kate squeezed my arm. You okay? I nodded. I've been preparing for this moment for months. Want backup? No, I said, gathering my materials. This conversation needs to happen between Uncle Richard and me. Uncle Richard was pacing his office when I entered, radiating tension. He spun to face me as the door closed. How could you do this? He demanded. Going behind my back, creating this elaborate deception. It wasn't my first choice, I replied, keeping my voice calm. I tried speaking to you directly about the company's problems. I tried presenting solutions through proper channels. You dismissed my concerns. You excluded me from meetings. You undermined my authority with my own team. So this is revenge? Embarrassing me in front of potential investors, staging this coup? This isn't revenge, Uncle Richard. It's a rescue. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze directly. Hartwell Industries is failing under your leadership. Not because you lack intelligence or business acumen, but because you've been making decisions based on ego rather than data. You've been trying so hard to prove yourself worthy of grandfather's legacy that you've risked destroying it completely. He flinched as if I'd struck him. That's not fair. Isn't it? You promoted Jeremy despite his complete lack of qualifications. You invested millions in vanity projects while our core business infrastructure crumbled. You surrounded yourself with yes men who tell you what you want to hear instead of what you need to know. And you think you can do better? He challenged, his voice rising. You've never had to make the hard decisions, bear the full weight of leadership. I've been making those hard decisions for over a year, I countered. Every time Monarch provided additional funding, I was weighing risk factors, assessing implications, planning contingencies. The difference is, I did it, based on facts, not fear. He turned away, staring out the window at the factory floor below. Your father would never have done this. He would have found another way. Dad didn't have to, I said quietly, because grandfather respected his expertise and listened to his advice. You never extended me the same courtesy. Uncle Richard's shoulders slumped slightly, the first sign that my words might be penetrating his defensiveness. What happens now? He asked, his voice subdued. You fire me? Take my name off the building? That depends on you. I moved to stand beside him, both of us looking out at the workers below. I don't want to run Hartwell Industries alone. I need experienced executives who understand the industry and have established relationships with clients and suppliers. He glanced at me sideways, but not as CEO. No, I acknowledged. Not as CEO, but perhaps as president of client relations, focusing on what you do best, building and maintaining the personal connections that have always been vital to our success. His pride warred visibly with practicality. And Jeremy? That's negotiable. If he's willing to earn his position instead of expecting it as a birthright, there could be a place for him. But no more invented vice presidencies or vanity projects. Uncle Richard was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. I waited, giving him the space to process this seismic shift in his reality. And the Redwood offer? He finally asked. I'm not interested in selling, I replied. But I am interested in a strategic partnership that could provide capital for targeted growth once we've stabilized. That's something we can explore together. if you're willing to work with me rather than against me." He turned to face me fully, studying me with new eyes. I stood steady under his scrutiny, neither challenging nor deferring. "You really are John's granddaughter," he said finally, a hint of reluctant admiration in his voice. He would have appreciated the strategy if not the methods. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was acknowledgement, a foundation we could potentially build upon. "We should get back," I said, checking my watch. "They'll be waiting." He nodded, straightening his tie with that familiar gesture. "Just so we're clear, this discussion isn't over. I'll be consulting with my own attorneys about these convertible notes and the legality of your approach." "I would expect nothing less," I replied. It was his right to verify the legitimacy of my claim, though I had absolute confidence in Sophia's legal work. When we returned to the conference room, the tension was palpable. The Redwood team sat on one side of the table, their expressions professionally neutral. Kate and Jeremy sat on the other, both looking up expectantly as we entered. "Thank you for your patience," I said, taking my seat. "Given the developments of the past hour, I'd like to clarify Hartwell Industries' position regarding Redwood Capital's acquisition offer." I turned to Vanessa Liu. "While we appreciate your interest and the thoroughness of your proposal, Hartwell Industries is not for sale at this time." Vanessa's expression remained unchanged. "I assume you're speaking as the representative of Monarch Investments, now the majority shareholder?" "I am," I confirmed. "However, we are open to discussing a more limited strategic partnership that could provide growth capital in specific areas while allowing Hartwell Industries to remain independently owned and operated." The senior Redwood executive leaned forward. "Ms. Hartwell, our analysis suggests that your company requires significant capital infusion to address its current challenges. Without a full acquisition, we would be reluctant to make that level of investment." "I understand your concern," I replied, "but Monarch Investments, which is to say I, am prepared to provide the necessary bridge funding to stabilize operations while we implement the restructuring plan I outlined earlier. Once we've returned to profitability, we can revisit potential partnership structures from a position of strength rather than necessity." Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "While the ownership question may still need clarification, I support Amanda's position regarding the Redwood offer. Hartwell Industries is a family company with deep community ties. Maintaining independence is a priority." I glanced at him, surprised but grateful for the show of unity, however tentative. Vanessa and her colleagues exchanged looks, clearly reassessing their approach. After a brief whispered consultation, she turned back to us. "We're disappointed but respect your decision. However, our interest remains. We'll be monitoring Hartwell's progress closely, and should circumstances change, we hope you'll consider reopening discussions." "Of course," I agreed, "and we appreciate your understanding." As the meeting concluded and the Redwood team gathered their materials to leave, Vanessa pulled me aside. "Impressive maneuvering," she said quietly. "Though I admit, I'm curious about one thing. Did you plan this revelation all along, or was it forced by our appearance?" "Let's just say I adapted to changing circumstances," I replied with a small smile. She nodded appreciatively. "The offer to join our team stands, by the way. Someone with your strategic thinking would be an asset to Redwood." "I'm flattered, but my place is here." "For now," she acknowledged. "But business landscapes change. When you're ready for a new challenge, call me." She handed me her card, a different one from before, with her direct line handwritten on the back. After the Redwood delegation departed, an awkward silence descended on the remaining Hartwell family members. Jeremy was the first to break it. "This is insane," he declared, throwing his pen on the table. "You can't just waltz in and claim ownership based on some technical clause in a financing agreement. Dad, tell her this isn't going to stand." "Uncle, bye." Richard sighed heavily. "It's not that simple, Jeremy. If her documentation is legitimate, and I suspect it is, then legally, Amanda now controls the company. So we just roll over? Let her take everything grandfather built? Everything you've worked for? Everything I've worked for? I repeated, unable to contain my frustration. Jeremy, what exactly have you contributed to Hartwell Industries? Your product development initiative is millions over budget with nothing to show for it. You miss half your meetings and spend company money on client entertainment that somehow never includes actual clients. Jeremy's face flushed. You don't know what you're talking about. My project is going to revolutionize. Your project is dead, I interrupted flatly. It was a bad concept poorly executed, and we can't afford to keep funding it. If you want to remain with the company, you'll need to take on a real role with measurable deliverables and accountability. He looked to his father for support, but Uncle Richard simply shook his head. She's right, son. The project isn't viable. Jeremy stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is bullshit. All of it. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Kate winced. That went about as well as expected. He'll... Calm down, Uncle Richard said, though he didn't sound convinced. Once he understands the reality of the situation. I wasn't so sure. Jeremy had never faced real consequences for his failures before. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, we needed to address the immediate transition of leadership. I'd like to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, I said, to formalize the changes and begin implementing the restructuring plan. Uncle Richard nodded slowly. I'll have Brenda make the arrangements. Though I should warn you, some board members are longtime friends of mine. They may not accept this change easily. I'm prepared for that, I replied. And I hope I can count on your support, at least in principle. Whatever our personal differences, we all want Hartwell Industries to succeed. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded again. You'll have my support in the boardroom. But as I said earlier, I'll be reviewing the legal aspects of this situation thoroughly. I wouldn't expect anything less, I assured him. As Uncle Richard left to begin making calls, Kate moved to sit beside me. So, she said with a hint of a smile, CEO Amanda Hartwell has a nice ring to it. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It doesn't quite feel real yet. Oh, it's real, she confirmed. And based on the look on Dad's face, he knows it too. She tilted her head, studying me. You know, part of me should be angry about this. You've effectively demoted my father, and probably ended my brother's career at Hartwell. But honestly, I'm just relieved. Relieved? The company was dying, Amanda. Everyone could see it except Dad and Jeremy. You did what needed to be done. She paused, considering. Though, I am curious, what happens to my position in all this? I hadn't anticipated this question, but the answer came easily. You stay exactly where you are, if that's what you want. You're good at your job, Kate. Your marketing strategies have been one of the few bright spots in our recent performance. She smiled, relaxing visibly. Good, because I have ideas. Lots of them. Ideas I stopped sharing because Dad wasn't listening. I'm listening, I assured her. In fact, I'm going to need your help with the transition. The employees trust you. Having your visible support will make this easier for everyone. Kate nodded, her expression turning serious. You know, Grandpa used to say that the true measure of a leader isn't what they do when things are easy, but the choices they make when there are no good options. I think he'd be proud of you today. Her words touched me more deeply than I expected. Through all the planning, all the strategic maneuvering, I'd been driven by the practical need to save the company. But underneath ran a deeper current, the desire to honor my grandfather's legacy, to be worthy of the faith he'd placed in me. Thank you, I said simply. As Kate left to return to her department, I remained in the conference room, taking a moment to absorb the enormity of what had just happened. In the space of a few hours, I had transformed from marginalized family member to majority owner and de facto CEO of Hartwell Industries. The hard work was just beginning. I had a restructuring plan to implement, a board to convince, employees to reassure, and family relationships to repair if possible. But for the first time in over a year, I felt something like hope for the company's future. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "How did it go?" I typed back, "I'm the new CEO. Details later." Her response came immediately. "Drinks tonight." "You're buying, boss lady." I smiled, tucking my phone away. There would be time for celebration later. Right now, I had a company to save. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, calls, and preparation. Word spread quickly throughout the company that something significant had changed, though the details remained confidential until the official board announcement. I met with Frank Coleman and other department heads, briefing them on the situation and enlisting their support for the transition. By 6 o'clock, I was mentally exhausted, but still riding the adrenaline of the day's events. I gathered my things, preparing to meet Sophia for those promised drinks, when there was a soft knock at my office door. "Come in," I called, expecting Kate or Frank with last-minute questions. Instead, it was my father. "Dad," I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Thomas Hartwell walked slowly into the office, his gait still slightly uneven from the stroke, but his eyes clear and alert. "Kate called me, told me what happened today." He settled carefully into the chair across from my desk. "Thought I should hear the full story from you." I hesitated, unsure how much he knew or how he felt about my actions. "It's complicated." He smiled slightly. "I gathered that. My daughter secretly financing the family company, then executing a takeover when Richard tried to push her out? That sounds complicated indeed." There was no judgment in his tone, just a hint of something that might have been admiration. "Are you angry?" I asked, needing to know. He considered the question seriously. "Not angry, no. Surprised, certainly. A bit sad that it came to this." He looked around my office, his gaze settling on the family photo on my desk. "But mostly, I'm proud of you, Amanda." Relief washed through me. "You are?" "You saw a problem, and instead of complaining or walking away, you found a solution. Not an easy solution or a perfect one, but a path forward when all other options were exhausted." He leaned forward, his eyes intent on mine. "That's what leaders do." "Uncle Richard doesn't see it that way," I pointed out. "He thinks I betrayed the family." Dad sighed. "Richard has always confused loyalty with agreement. He expects everyone to follow his lead without question, regardless of where he's leading them." He shook his head. "It's why he and I clashed so often even before my stroke." This was news to me. My father and uncle had always presented a united front in public, their disagreements kept private. "I didn't know that," I admitted. "We tried to keep our conflicts away from the next generation," he explained. "Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe if you'd seen how we worked through our differences, you wouldn't have felt the need to create monarch investments in the shadows." I considered this. "Would you have done it differently if you were in my position?" He thought for a moment. "I might have tried one more direct confrontation with Richard before going the monarch route. But then, I'm his brother, not his niece. The dynamics are different." He smiled ruefully. "And frankly, I don't know if I would have had your creativity or courage." I hadn't expected that. My father had always been my standard for business acumen and integrity. To hear him suggest that my approach might have required qualities he himself might have lacked was disorienting. "What happens now?" he asked, echoing Uncle Richard's earlier question. "Tomorrow we have an emergency board meeting to formalize the leadership change. Then we implement the restructuring plan, focusing on our core business, cutting the unprofitable expansions, rebuilding our financial reserves." I hesitated, then added, "I've offered Uncle Richard a role as president of client relations. I'm hoping he'll accept." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "Smart. Richard's always been best with people, worst with numbers. That plays to his strengths while limiting his ability to make financial decisions. Will he take it, do you think?" "Eventually. His pride is wounded right now, but Richard's practical at heart. He knows the company needs him, and he needs the company. It's too central to his identity for him to walk away completely." I hadn't considered that perspective. In my focus on the operational aspects of the transition, I'd perhaps underestimated the psychological impact on my uncle. "And Jeremy?" Dad asked. I sighed. "That's more complicated. He doesn't have Richard's experience or connections to fall back on. I've offered him a real position with clear expectations, but I'm not sure he'll accept the demotion and accountability." "He might surprise you," Dad said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Sometimes people rise to the expectations set for them. Richard never set high expectations for Jeremy, so he never had to rise." "I hope you're right," I said, though privately I thought Jeremy would more likely leave in a huff than adapt to new standards. Dad checked his watch and began the careful process of standing. "I should let you go. Kate mentioned you have dinner plans." "Just drinks with my lawyer," I said, rising to help him. "Nothing that can't wait if you'd like to join us. I think you'd like Sophia." He smiled but shook his head. "Another time. Your mother's expecting me for dinner, and you know how she worries if I'm late." I walked him to his car, both of us moving at his deliberate pace. As we reached the vehicle, he turned to me, his expression serious again. "One piece of advice, if I may, from someone who's made his share of mistakes running this company." "Of course," I said. "Don't let winning today's battle make you overconfident about tomorrow's war. The hardest part isn't taking control, it's using that control wisely over time. Making decisions that balance short-term necessities with long-term vision. Treating people with dignity, even when they disappoint you." I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "I'll remember that." "I know you will." He squeezed my hand. "Your grandfather saw it in you, you know. That balance of sharp mind and good heart. It's why he left you that inheritance directly, outside the company structure." "He never told me that," I said quietly. "He didn't have to. He showed you every time he took you through the factory, introduced you to the workers, taught you how each part of the process connected to the others." Dad smiled at the memory. "He was giving you the education he thought a future leader needed." I felt a sudden ache of loss, wishing my grandfather could have seen this day. Would he have approved of my methods, or would he have been disappointed in the family conflict they had caused? As if reading my thoughts, Dad added, "John Hartwell was a pragmatist, Amanda. He built this company through determination and strategic thinking, not sentimentality. He would have understood what you did and why." With that reassurance warming me, I helped him into his car and watched as he drove carefully away. Then I turned back to look at the Hartwell Industries building, its windows glowing in the early evening light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The board meeting, the formal announcement to employees, the beginning of the restructuring process. There would be resistance to overcome, relationships to rebuild, trust to earn. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the satisfaction of having protected what mattered most. Not just a family business, but a community, a legacy, a future. The silent investor had found her voice, and Hartwell Industries would be stronger for it. Morning light filtered through the blinds of the Hartwell Industries boardroom as I arranged my materials at the head of the table. It was 7:15 a.m., 45 minutes before the emergency board meeting was scheduled to begin. I wanted this time alone to center myself, to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a challenging session. The polished mahogany table reflected the overhead lights, its surface marred only by a thin scratch near the far end. A reminder of the time my grandfather had slammed down a failed prototype in frustration during a product development meeting. He'd kept the scratch as a reminder, he told me once, that perfection was elusive but excellence was achievable. I ran my fingers along the smooth wood, drawing strength from the connection to him, to the legacy I was fighting to preserve. The door opened, interrupting my reverie. "Thought I might find you here early," Frank Coleman said, setting down 2 coffee cups. "Figured you could use the caffeine. Big day." I accepted the cup gratefully. "Thanks, Frank. Couldn't sleep much. Anyway, understandable." He took a seat to my right, my father's old chair. "The board's going to have questions, lots of them." "I'm prepared," I assured him, though the flutter in my stomach suggested otherwise. Frank nodded, studying me over the rim of his cup. "You know, your grandfather faced a board revolt back in '89. The company had overextended, taken on too much debt for that expansion into Michigan. 3 board members wanted to sell to interstate manufacturing. This was news to me." "What happened?" A smile crept across Frank's weathered face. John walked into the meeting with detailed financial projections, showing exactly how he'd turn things around in 18 months. Then he put his house up as collateral for an emergency loan, told them he was betting everything on himself, and asked if they had the guts to do the same. "Did it work?" "We're still here, aren't we?" Frank's eyes twinkled. "The point is, that board respected boldness backed by competence. This one will too if you show them both." The door opened again as Kate arrived, immaculately dressed, and carrying her own stack of materials. "Morning, team," she said brightly, though I could see the tension around her eyes. "Ready for the revolution?" "I prefer to think of it as a course correction," I replied, sipping my coffee. Potato, she shrugged, taking a seat. "Dad spent half the night on the phone with board members. Couldn't hear everything, but it sounded like he was preparing them for today rather than rallying opposition." That was unexpected, but welcome news. "Any sign of Jeremy this morning?" Kate shook her head. "His car wasn't in the lot when I arrived. My guess? He's nursing a hangover somewhere expensive." Frank cleared his throat diplomatically. "I should check in with manufacturing before the meeting. The floor supervisors are getting questions from workers. Nothing specific yet, but people know something's happening." "Tell them there will be a company-wide announcement this afternoon," I instructed. "Emphasize that no immediate changes to staffing or production are planned. We want to minimize disruption and anxiety." As Frank left, Kate moved closer. "So, CEO Hartwell, what's the battle plan?" I laid out the binder containing my presentation. "First, establish the legal validity of the Monarch conversion. Sophia will handle that part." "Smart to bring in outside counsel," Kate nodded. "Then, present the current financial situation honestly but without alarmism. Follow with the restructuring plan, focusing on strengthening our core business rather than dramatic cuts. Emphasize continuity where possible." "And the leadership transition?" I hesitated. This was the trickiest part. "I'll propose a new executive structure with me as CEO, Uncle Richard as President of Client Relations, and you continuing as Marketing Director with expanded responsibilities. Other positions to be determined based on performance and commitment to the new direction." Kate tilted her head. "You're offering Dad a real role, not just a ceremonial title." "We need him," I said simply. "His client relationships are valuable, and burning bridges within the family serves no one." "Gracious in victory," she noted with a hint of surprise. "Not sure I'd be so magnanimous if someone had dismissed me from a meeting and treated me like an intern." I thought of my father's advice from the previous evening. The hardest part isn't taking control, it's using that control wisely. This isn't about winning or losing, it's about saving the company. Before Kate could respond, The boardroom door opened again as Sophia arrived with her legal assistant. She looked professional and formidable in a charcoal suit, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Amanda," she greeted me with a nod. "The board secretary informed me that all members will be present, either in person or via conference call. Full attendance." "Good," I said, though my stomach tightened further. Full attendance meant maximum scrutiny. Sophia sat up at the side table, arranging legal documents with practiced efficiency. "I reviewed your presentation. The financial data is compelling, but remember, some of these board members have known your uncle for decades. Logic alone won't sway them. You need to connect emotionally as well." "How do I do that when I'm essentially deposing their friend?" "By reminding them what's at stake beyond dollars and cents. The company's reputation, the community impact, the family legacy." She checked her watch. "They'll start arriving in 10 minutes. Ready?" I nodded, more confidently than I felt. "Ready." The next 30 minutes were a blur of handshakes, introductions, and carefully neutral small talk as board members filtered in. Most I knew from previous meetings or company events, though I'd never addressed them as a group without Uncle Richard leading the proceedings. Albert Chen, our longest-serving board member and my grandfather's former attorney, studied me with undisguised curiosity. Margaret Wilson, who ran the Regional Banking Association, gave me an encouraging smile. Howard Palmer, who owned 3 manufacturing companies himself, merely nodded gruffly before taking his seat. At exactly 8 a.m., Uncle Richard entered with Jeremy trailing behind him. My cousin looked uncharacteristically sober, his usual swagger replaced by tight-lipped tension. Uncle Richard, for his part, appeared composed but tired, the strain of the past 24 hours evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "Good morning, everyone," I began once they were seated. "Thank you for accommodating this emergency session on such short notice. As the meeting notice indicated, we're here to address significant changes in Hartwell Industries' ownership structure and leadership." I gestured to Sophia. "I've asked Ms. Bennett to begin with a legal overview of the situation." Sophia rose smoothly, distributing documents to each board member. "Good morning. I'm Sophia Bennett, external counsel representing Amanda Hartwell, in her capacity as owner of Monarch Investments." She walked them through the history of Monarch's involvement with Hartwell Industries, the terms of the convertible notes, and the company's failure to meet the performance metrics that triggered the conversion clause. "In summary," she concluded, "as of yesterday, Monarch Investments has legally converted its debt position to equity, resulting in a 53% ownership stake in Hartwell Industries. This makes Ms. Hartwell, as Monarch's sole principal, the majority shareholder." Albert Chen spoke first, peering over his reading glasses. "Ms. Bennett, while the documentation appears thorough, the board was never informed that Ms. Hartwell was behind Monarch Investments. This raises questions of disclosure and potential conflicts of interest." Sophia nodded respectfully. "A fair concern, Mr. Chen. However, neither corporate law nor Hartwell's bylaws require disclosure of the beneficial ownership of an external investor unless specifically requested during due diligence. No such request was made when the convertible notes were established. Because we had no reason to suspect our own family member was secretly orchestrating a takeover," Jeremy interjected, his voice tight with anger. "Not a takeover," I corrected firmly. "A rescue." Howard Palmer cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartwell, while the legal mechanics may be sound, this approach seems unnecessarily adversarial. Why not simply offer your investment directly, with transparent terms?" It was the question I'd been expecting, the one that cut closest to the heart of the matter. I met his gaze directly. "Mr. Palmer, when my father suffered his stroke 18 months ago, the leadership dynamics at Hartwell Industries changed dramatically. My recommendations were increasingly ignored. My authority was undermined. Ultimately, I was excluded from critical meetings despite my role as director of operations. I gestured to the financial reports in their binders. During this same period, the company began making decisions that threatened its financial stability. Had I approached my uncle directly with an offer of investment, I believe it would have been rejected precisely because it came from me. Margaret Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Richard, would that assessment be accurate? All eyes turned to my uncle. The room fell silent as he considered his response. I may have been unreceptive to Amanda's input during that period, he admitted. Finally. In retrospect, that was an error in judgment. It was as close to an acknowledgement of fault as I'd ever heard from him. Jeremy looked at his father in disbelief. You're not seriously validating this? He demanded. Uncle Richard silenced him with a look before continuing. However, I maintain that creating a secret investment vehicle was an extreme response that has damaged trust within the family and potentially within this company. With respect, I countered, the damage to trust began when competence was sidelined in favor of family hierarchy. When data-driven recommendations were dismissed without consideration. When the company my grandfather built began to falter because hard truths were unwelcome. I opened my binder to the current financial statements, which brings us to our present situation. Hartwell Industries is facing a critical juncture. We can continue on our current path, which the numbers clearly show is unsustainable, or we can implement a strategic restructuring to secure our future. For the next 40 minutes, I walked the board through a detailed analysis of our financial position, operational challenges, and market opportunities. I didn't sugarcoat the difficulties we faced, but I also emphasized our core strengths, our skilled workforce, our manufacturing expertise, our reputation for quality. When I concluded with my proposed restructuring plan, there was a moment of contemplative silence. I could see the board members processing the information, weighing options, considering implications. Albert Chen removed his glasses, polishing them slowly. This is a comprehensive plan, Ms. Hartwell, but implementation will require strong, stable leadership. He looked pointedly between Uncle Richard and me. The question facing this board is whether the company can function effectively with this complicated family dynamic at the helm. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I agree completely, Mr. Chen, which is why I'd like to propose a new executive structure that leverages our complementary strengths while clarifying reporting lines. I displayed the organizational chart I'd prepared. I would assume the role of Chief Executive Officer, with overall responsibility for company strategy and operations. Richard would serve as President of Client Relations, focusing on maintaining and expanding our customer relationships, an area where his expertise is unquestionable. Uncle Richard's eyebrows rose slightly at this acknowledgement of his skills. Kate would continue as Marketing Director with expanded responsibilities for brand development. And Frank Coleman would be promoted to Chief Operating Officer, overseeing day-to-day manufacturing operations. And me? Jeremy asked, his voice tight. I notice my position isn't on your little chart. I met his gaze steadily. You have talents, Jeremy, but they haven't been effectively utilized in your current role. I'd like to discuss potential positions that better align with your actual interests and abilities, rather than forcing you into a role that doesn't fit. That's corporate speak for you're fired, he said bitterly. No one's being fired, I clarified. I'm proposing a realignment of responsibilities based on demonstrated competencies and company needs. Margaret Wilson leaned forward. Richard, what's your position on this proposed structure? All eyes turned to my uncle once again. He studied the organizational chart for a long moment before responding. It has merit, he admitted reluctantly. Amanda's assessment of our financial situation is accurate, if uncomfortable. Her restructuring plan addresses the key issues without resorting to dramatic cuts or asset sales. He looked at me, something like respect flickering in his eyes. While I maintain reservations about the method of this transition, I cannot, in good conscience oppose a plan that offers Hartwell Industries its best chance for recovery and growth. A murmur went through the room. Uncle Richard's qualified support carried significant weight with the board members who had long respected his judgment. Howard Palmer spoke next. I've served on boards through numerous leadership transitions, some smooth, some catastrophic. What determines success isn't the circumstances of the change, but the clarity of vision and unity of purpose that follows. He looked around the table. The plan before us is sound. The legal position is clear. The question is whether this board believes Amanda Hartwell can lead this company effectively, with or without her uncle's cooperation. I believe she can, said a new voice from the doorway. We all turned to see my father standing there, leaning, slightly on his cane but straight-backed and clear-eyed. Thomas, Uncle Richard said, surprise evident in his voice. We weren't expecting you. Clearly, my father replied dryly. He made his way slowly to an empty chair as the board members murmured greetings. Once seated, he continued. I've reviewed Amanda's analysis and restructuring plan. It's thorough, pragmatic, and forward-thinking. Exactly what Hartwell Industries needs right now. With all due respect, Thomas, Albert Chen interjected gently, you've been removed from day-to-day operations since your stroke. The company has changed significantly in that time. Yes, my father agreed, and not for the better. He gestured to the financial reports. The numbers don't lie, Albert. The company my father built, the company Richard and I grew together, is in trouble. Not because of market conditions or external factors, but because of internal decisions made after I stepped back. Uncle Richard stiffened but remained silent. Amanda saw the problems early, my father continued. She tried to address them through proper channels. When that failed, she found another way, using her own inheritance to keep the company afloat while developing a comprehensive recovery plan. He looked around the table, his gaze steady and authoritative despite his physical limitations. You all knew my father. John Hartwell valued results over protocol, substance over appearances. He would have recognized Amanda's actions for what they were, loyalty to the company's best interests, even when it meant challenging family authority. The invocation of my grandfather's name created a palpable shift in the room. Many of these board members had served during his leadership and held him in high regard. Thomas makes a compelling point, Margaret Wilson said after a moment. John built this company on practical problem-solving, not rigid hierarchy. He would have judged this situation on outcomes, not procedures. Howard Palmer nodded in agreement. I've seen too many family businesses fail because they prioritized family harmony over business realities. At least Amanda found a way to save the company while offering her uncle a dignified role going forward. The momentum was shifting. I could feel it in the room. A growing consensus that while the transition might be uncomfortable, the alternative was worse. Albert Chen, ever the attorney, framed the decision formally. It seems we have two matters before us. First, acknowledging the change in majority ownership resulting from Monarch's conversion of debt to equity. And second, approving the proposed executive restructuring. He looked around the table. Unless there are objections, I suggest we put these matters to a vote. Jeremy pushed back his chair abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're just rolling over and accepting this coup without a fight? It's not a coup, Jeremy, Uncle Richard said quietly. It's a recognition of reality. The reality is that Hartwell Industries needs this restructuring to survive. And Amanda's position as majority shareholder is legally sound, whether we like how it came about or not. Jeremy stared at his father in disbelief. So that's it? You're surrendering to her? No, Uncle Richard corrected, his voice firm. I'm putting the company first, as your grandfather would have expected. As Amanda has been doing all along, though I was too proud to see it. Jeremy's face flushed dark red. Without another word, he stormed out of the boardroom, slamming the door behind him. An uncomfortable silence followed his exit. I felt a twinge of regret for the family rift that was widening before our eyes, even as I remained convinced of the necessity of my actions. "Perhaps we should proceed with the vote," Sophia suggested tactfully. The results were decisive. The board unanimously acknowledged the change in ownership structure, with Uncle Richard abstaining. The executive restructuring was approved by a vote of 7-1, with Uncle Richard casting the lone dissenting vote, a symbolic gesture that I understood was necessary for his pride. As the meeting concluded and board members began to disperse, offering congratulations or words of encouragement as they passed, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, apprehension about the challenges ahead, and lingering sadness about the family tensions my actions had exacerbated. Uncle Richard approached as I gathered my materials. "Well played," he said, his tone neutral. "Your grandfather would have appreciated the strategic thinking, if not the secrecy." "Thank you," I replied, unsure what else to say. "I meant what I said about your role going forward. We do need your client relationships and industry knowledge." He nodded, studying me with new eyes. "You know, when you were little, you used to follow me around the factory, asking endless questions. Even then, you wanted to understand how everything worked, how all the pieces fit together." The memory surprised me. I'd forgotten those early tours with my uncle before my grandfather had taken a special interest in my education. "I remember you were always patient with my questions," I said softly. "You were eager to learn. That's rare." He straightened his tie, a familiar gesture that now seemed like a shield against vulnerability. "I'll need time to consider the president position and to adjust to all of this." "I understand." He hesitated, then asked the question that I sensed had been bothering him most. "How long have you been planning this?" "I created Monarch Investments when the company first needed emergency funding," I replied honestly. "But I only decided to use the conversion clause when it became clear the company couldn't continue on its current path. When I was dismissed from that meeting, it confirmed what I already suspected, that my input would never be valued as long as the current power structure remained in place." He absorbed this, then nodded once. "Fair enough. We'll talk more about the transition details tomorrow." With that, he walked away, his shoulders straight, but the weight of the morning's events visible in his gait. My father approached next, moving carefully but with purpose. "Proud of you," he said simply, resting his hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for coming," I replied. "Your support made a difference." "Least I could do." His eyes crinkled with the hint of a smile. "Richard will come around, you know. He's stubborn, but he's not foolish. And he loves this company too much to sabotage its recovery out of wounded pride." "And Jeremy?" Dad's expression sobered. "That's harder to predict. He's never faced real consequences before. This is uncharted territory for him." Kate joined us, excitement barely contained behind her professional demeanor. "So, CEO Hartwell, what's our first official act? Besides the company-wide announcement, I mean." I considered the question. "A town hall meeting with all department heads this afternoon. They need to hear directly from leadership about what's changing and what isn't. Then individual meetings with key clients to reassure them of continuity despite the executive restructuring." "Smart." Dad nodded approvingly. "Stability first, then change." "Exactly." I checked my watch. "And I need to prepare the company announcement. People are already hearing rumors. We need to get ahead of the speculation." As Dad and Kate left to attend to their own responsibilities, I remained in the boardroom for a moment, collecting my thoughts. The morning's victory felt significant but incomplete. The legal battle was won, the board convinced, the restructuring plan approved. But the real work was just beginning. Transitioning Hartwell Industries back to profitability would require more than a good plan on paper. It would demand consistent execution, difficult decisions, and most challenging of all, rebuilding trust among employees, clients, and family, members alike. I gathered my materials and headed to what would now be my office, my uncle's former space with its imposing desk and impressive view. As I walked through the administrative area, I noticed Brenda, Uncle Richard's longtime assistant, clearing personal items from her desk. "Brenda?" I stopped, concerned. "What are you doing?" She looked up, her expression guarded. "I assumed you'd want your own assistant. I was just preparing to move back to the general administrative pool." "Why would you assume that?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because I've been Richard's assistant for 15 years, she replied, as if it were obvious. "I thought, with the changes." I shook my head firmly. "Brenda, your institutional knowledge is invaluable. You know this company, its clients, its procedures better than almost anyone. Unless you'd prefer not to work with me, I'd like you to stay exactly where you are." Relief washed over her face. "Oh, well, Thank you, Ms. Hartwell." "Amanda," I corrected with a smile. "And thank you for your professionalism during this transition. I know it can't be easy." This small interaction reinforced something I'd been considering since the board meeting. The human element of this transition would be just as critical as the financial and operational aspects. People throughout the company would be wondering about their own positions, reading meaning into every word and action from leadership. In my new office, I sat not behind the massive desk, but at the small conference table by the window. The symbolism of occupying my uncle's chair felt unnecessary and potentially divisive. Instead, I focused on crafting a company-wide announcement that would balance honesty about our challenges with confidence in our path forward. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Congratulations, CEO Hartwell. Drink's still on you, but now we're upgrading to champagne." I smiled, despite the gravity of the day's events. There would be time for celebration later. For now, there was a company to stabilize, employees to reassure, and a family legacy to preserve. The desk phone rang, my first call as CEO. I took a deep breath and picked up the receiver. Amanda Hartwell speaking. "Ms. Hartwell, this is James Mercer from First Regional Bank," came a formal voice. "I understand there have been some leadership changes at Hartwell Industries." Word traveled fast in business circles. "Yes, Mr. Mercer. I've assumed the role of CEO as part of a strategic restructuring. I'd be happy to discuss how these changes will positively impact our banking relationship." "I see," he replied, his tone careful. "As your primary lender, we naturally have concerns about stability during transitions of this nature." And so, it began, the first of many conversations where I would need to inspire confidence, demonstrate competence, and prove that Hartwell Industries under my leadership was a sound business partner. "I understand completely," I assured him. "In fact, I was planning to reach out to you later today. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting where I can walk you through our restructuring plan and address any specific concerns you might have." As I spoke, I noticed Frank Coleman passing by the office door. He caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. The first department meetings had gone well. I returned a grateful nod while continuing my conversation with the banker. By lunchtime, I had drafted the company announcement, scheduled meetings with our top 3 clients for the following day, and begun reviewing the immediate action items from my restructuring plan. The adrenaline of the morning's confrontation had given way to focused determination. Kate appeared in my doorway, sandwich in hand. "Thought you might have forgotten to eat," she said, placing it on my desk alongside a bottle of water. "Thanks," I said gratefully, suddenly aware of my hunger. "How are things on the marketing front?" "Busy," she replied, sinking into a chair. "Client calls coming in, people wanting to know what the leadership change means for their projects. Mostly positive, So far, apparently your reputation for getting things done has spread beyond our walls. Good to hear. I unwrapped the sandwich. Any sign of Jeremy? Kate shook her head. His office is cleaned out. Security says he left the building right after the board meeting and hasn't returned. I felt a pang of regret. Despite our differences, Jeremy was family, and I hadn't wanted things to end this way with him. He'll cool down eventually, Kate said, correctly reading my expression. Or he won't. Either way, that's on him, not you. She had a point, though it didn't completely dispel my concern. Family businesses blurred the lines between professional and personal in ways that made clean breaks nearly impossible. What about your father? I asked. How's he handling the transition so far? Kate considered the question. Better than I expected, honestly. He spent the morning with his key client contacts, reassuring them about continuity. I think having a defined role with clear value has helped him adjust to the new reality. That was encouraging news. Uncle Richard's cooperation would make the transition infinitely smoother. There is one thing, though, Kate added, her expression turning serious. The finance team found some irregularities in the books for Jeremy's product development initiative, expenses that don't match any approved vendors, invoices without proper documentation. My stomach tightened. How bad? They're still investigating, but preliminary estimate is around $300,000. Misappropriated funds? She nodded grimly. Looks that way. Dad didn't know. I'm certain of that. He may have given Jeremy too much latitude, but he wouldn't have approved financial impropriety. This complicated an already complex situation. If Jeremy had indeed misused company funds, we had both legal and financial issues to address beyond the leadership transition. Have accounting. Do a complete audit of all expenses related to Jeremy's projects, I instructed. We need to understand the full scope before deciding how to proceed. Already underway, Kate confirmed. And Amanda? For what it's worth, I don't think this was malicious on Jeremy's part. Careless, entitled, yes, but not deliberately criminal. He's always had a fluid relationship with boundaries. That aligned with my own assessment of my cousin. Jeremy had been raised with privilege and few consequences, a combination that often blurred ethical lines without crossing into intentional wrongdoing. Let's see what the audit reveals before making any judgments, I said. In the meantime, we focus on moving forward with the restructuring plan. The afternoon passed in a flurry of meetings, phone calls, and preparations for the company-wide announcement. At 4:00 p.m., employees gathered in the main manufacturing area, the heart of Hartwell Industries, where raw materials became precision parts through the skilled hands of our workforce. Standing on a small platform with Uncle Richard, Kate, and Frank beside me in a show of unified leadership, I addressed the assembled employees for the first time as CEO. The sea of faces looking back at me, some curious, some concerned, all attentive, reminded me of exactly what was at stake in this transition. Good afternoon, I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. As you've likely heard, today marks a significant change for Hartwell Industries. After careful consideration by our board of directors, I've been appointed Chief Executive Officer as part of a strategic restructuring of our leadership team. A murmur went through the crowd. Though rumors had been circulating all day, the official confirmation still created a ripple of reaction. I know changes in leadership can create uncertainty, I continued. So let me be clear about what this means, and what it doesn't mean, for Hartwell Industries and for each of you. I outlined the key points of the restructuring, emphasizing stability in core operations and manufacturing, while being honest about the financial challenges we faced and the changes needed to address them. Hartwell Industries isn't just a company, I said in conclusion. It's a community, one that my grandfather built, that my father and uncle expanded, and that each of you sustains through your skill, dedication, and hard work every day. The changes we're implementing aren't about erasing our past, but about securing our future together. As I finished speaking, there was a moment of silence before applause began, tentative at first, then growing stronger. I glanced at Uncle Richard, who nodded once in acknowledgement before stepping forward to add his own brief remarks, publicly passing the torch and endorsing the transition. His visible support, however reluctant it might be behind closed doors, sent a powerful message to employees who had known him as the face of Hartwell Industries for years. It was a gesture I hadn't expected but deeply appreciated. As the gathering dispersed and workers returned to their stations, Frank approached me with a satisfied expression. "That went well, better than expected." "Thanks to Uncle Richard," I acknowledged. "His endorsement matters to the old-timers especially." Frank nodded. "Richard's always been good at reading a room. He knows a unified front is best for the company right now." He checked his watch. "Production numbers for today look solid. No slowdown despite the disruption." "Good," I replied, relieved. Sometimes leadership transitions could impact productivity, as employees processed the changes and worried about implications. "One more thing," Frank added, his voice lowering. "I got a call from Melissa in accounting. Those financial irregularities in Jeremy's department? They're looking worse the deeper they dig." My brief moment of satisfaction faded. "How much worse?" "Potentially over $500,000, and there's evidence suggesting some vendors might not be legitimate businesses." This was exactly what I'd feared. Not just sloppy accounting, but potentially fraudulent activity that could have legal ramifications for the company. "Keep me updated," I instructed. "And Frank? Let's keep this between us, accounting, and Kate. For now. I want the full picture before we discuss it with Uncle Richard or the board." He nodded grimly. "Understood. See you at tomorrow's operations meeting." As the workday came to a close, I found myself alone in my new office, watching through the window as employees filed out to the parking lot. First day as CEO officially complete. The magnitude of the responsibility I'd taken on settled over me. 300 livelihoods, a multi-generation legacy, millions in assets and liabilities, all now ultimately my responsibility. The phone on my desk rang again. Brenda had gone. "Home," so I answered directly. "Amanda Hartwell." "Ms. Hartwell," came a familiar voice. "Vanessa Liu from Redwood Capital. I heard the board meeting went well for you this morning." News certainly traveled fast in business circles. "It did, thank you. Though, as I mentioned yesterday, Hartwell Industries is not for sale." "So you've made clear," she replied smoothly. "I'm not calling about an acquisition today. Rather, I wanted to let you know about a situation you might find relevant to your new position." Something in her tone put me on alert. "What kind of situation?" "Your cousin Jeremy reached out to Redwood Capital this afternoon. He's shopping around a new business venture, one that would directly compete with Hartwell Industries in several key markets." I sat up straighter. "Go on." "He claims to have proprietary designs and client relationships he's developed while at Hartwell. He's seeking startup funding to launch what he describes as a more innovative, forward-thinking alternative to your company." This was worse than I'd imagined. Not just misappropriated funds, but potentially stolen intellectual property and client information as well. "I appreciate you letting me know," I said carefully. "May I ask why you're sharing this information with me?" "Professional courtesy," she replied. "And perhaps a bit of self-interest. Redwood Capital values potential partnerships with companies that operate ethically and transparently. Your cousin's approach raised several red flags for us." "I see." I paused, considering my next words carefully. "And what did you tell Jeremy?" "That we'd need extensive due diligence before considering his proposal, including verification. That any intellectual property he claims to own is indeed his to share." Tactfully done. She hadn't explicitly rejected him, but had erected significant barriers. Thank you for the information, Ms. Liu. It's certainly relevant to some internal matters we're currently reviewing. I thought it might be, she replied. And Amanda? Congratulations on your new position. Hartwell Industries is fortunate to have leadership that prioritizes its long-term health over short-term appearances. That's unfortunately rare in family businesses. After we disconnected, I sat in the growing dusk, processing this new complication. Jeremy wasn't just leaving in a huff. He was actively planning to compete against us using knowledge, designs, and relationships developed at Hartwell Industries. Combined with the financial irregularities, this created a potentially explosive situation that could damage the company just as we were beginning our recovery efforts. I picked up my phone and called Sophia. We had legal issues to discuss, and quickly, the transition I'd orchestrated was proving even more complex than I'd anticipated. But as my grandfather used to say, problems were just opportunities wearing work clothes, and I had never been afraid of hard work. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of change. The audit of Jeremy's department revealed nearly $780,000 in misappropriated funds, forcing us to take legal action despite the family complications. Uncle Richard surprised everyone by supporting this decision, choosing company integrity over family loyalty. Hartwell Industries must be protected, he said firmly during the executive meeting where we made the decision. That's what my father would have expected. Jeremy retaliated by threatening to expose company secrets to competitors and speaking to industry publications about alleged mismanagement. His new venture, Pinnacle Precision Manufacturing, secured minimal funding despite our cease and desist notices. Through it all, Uncle Richard proved invaluable. His decades of client relationships stabilized our customer base during the transition, and we developed an effective working partnership built on mutual respect for the company's legacy. The board unanimously voted to remove the interim designation from my CEO title, offering me a long-term agreement that validated my vision for Hartwell Industries. Albert Chen, my grandfather's former attorney and our longest-serving board member, delivered the news personally. Your grandfather always said you had the gift, he told me. The ability to see both the forest and the trees, to balance immediate needs with long-term vision. Our restructuring plan began showing results faster than projected. We successfully secured favorable terms for our bank loan restructuring, providing the financial breathing room needed to complete our transformation efficiently. Then came the breakthrough we'd been working toward, the Miller contract. Our redesigned precision components, smaller, more efficient, and more cost-effective than our previous versions, secured a major automotive manufacturing deal that would ensure stable growth for years to come. I found Uncle Richard in the conference room after receiving the news. Congratulations, Amanda, he said, genuine respect in his voice. The redesign was your initiative from the beginning. This validation belongs primarily to you. It belongs to everyone who believed in Hartwell Industries' potential, I corrected, including you. Your client relationship groundwork made this possible. That evening, as I drove home past the Hartwell Industries sign prominent against the sunset sky, I reflected on our journey. My grandfather had built this company on core values that remained as relevant today as when he established them: integrity, excellence, community. How those values manifested in business strategy needed to evolve with the times, but the foundation remained solid. Finding that balance, honoring tradition while embracing necessary change, had been my greatest challenge as CEO. It would continue to be as we navigated an increasingly competitive landscape. But now, Hartwell Industries had the right team, the right direction, and the right leadership to thrive for generations to come. The silent investor had found her voice, and that voice was now leading Hartwell Industries into a future worthy of its past. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.